I thought just to open up, we could go around the room quickly and just introduce yourself, maybe say if you're representing an organization or tied to the community or something like that.
Jim Kane, Town Supervisor, Tofte.
Paul James, Town Supervisor, Tofte.
Barb Gervais, Town Clerk.
Jerry Gervais, Barb's husband.
Denise Early, County Commissioner.
Carol Peterson, Tofte resident.
Mary Jane Huggins, Tofte resident.
CJ Fernandez, AFLA, worked on a project.
Andy Hubbard with ARDC.
Bill Blank with the Gitchi-Gami Trail Association.
I'm Mark Redigan. I'm kind of Bill Blank's sidekick. Let's see how that goes. I'm with the DNR. I do all that.
And I'm Gary Hansen, probably the oldest one here.
Well, thanks. Great. Thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight. I know it's a gorgeous day. It's the first one we've had in a little while, so it's kind of difficult to get inside, but really appreciate it. Obviously, we've got a lot of stuff going on here, really important to the community. So just a little backstory for those who weren't able to attend the first meeting. Just North Shore Scenic Drive Council's main objective is working with the scenic byway from Duluth up to the Canadian border. Looks to preserve the cultural and natural intrinsic qualities and enhance the experience for the traveler going out the entire stretch of that All-American Road. Primarily, we got going on a design project to be able to enhance the accessibility and safety of a wayside, our site, and also maybe bring in some interpretation or just be able to we had money to be able to put together a wayside design project similar to this to be able to increase that or improve the accessibility and safety was the main focus going into it. So as a Scenic Drive Council, it's a group of elected officials and volunteers from all three counties, all the way up in communities as well. We sat down, kind of came down to a list that we have 65 different waysides listed on that byway. We came down to a short list, kind of had some conversation, got a little shorter of a list, and I think it was down to about 5. And that's where late in 2014, we met with representatives from each one of those all along the shore. Like we said, we had money to be able to host one wayside design project. We wanted to make the most bang for our buck. We wanted to go in, talk to the locals, see what kind of capacity was there to be able to implement, and not just have a wayside design that goes to the side. All of those meetings went extremely well. Had a lot of enthusiasm specifically here. A lot of people you see here today were there on that gorgeous fall afternoon. Where we were able to come in and see the park and look at the and then move on. So when I got back to Andy that evening or that next day, I said we were going to have a really tough time whittling this thing down because each one of those meetings went really well. The sites that we picked all had a very great quality. It seemed like a lot of enthusiasm turned out. So that's where we got back and started patching together some way that we could be able to make all of these happen and not have to make that hard decision. So that's where we had existing federal ADA money as well as Minnesota Lake Superior Coastal Program grant money. Went out and tried to patch some of the area, worked with CJ to find out what our gap was going to be able to undertake multiple design projects, be able to tie all these things together and make it the lowest cost as we could. Once this thing IRRB, Iron Range Rehabilitation Board, was able to bring that money into it and kind of patch that together. Once that project evolved and we were going forward with the Tofte side of things, the Gitchi-Gami Trail Association, as some of you may know, there was already money allocated to construct some of the trail section through the community, but that route hadn't been scoped. So we thought it was a perfect opportunity to blend those two projects together. And that's kind of where we were at deciding to go forward. So we were able to put the money together, get the contracts going at the end of 2014. Beginning of 2015, I think it was February, we came, met at the site, or maybe a little bit later actually, but met at the site, walked it, came all the way through the park, went down, walked the entire corridor with a few people, being able to get some context. We really had Then we had another meeting similar to this evening, able to just have a conversation, kind of the existing use, the history of the park, some of the problems with the Gitchi-Gami trail sections going through right there, being able to talk about some of the existing uses specifically to the park, and also some desired amenities, looking ahead, what the community would really want, because we don't necessarily want to just plot something out that looks pretty on a piece of paper. We want to be able to get something that really becomes a community asset the community can use, and really builds off of that. So took all of that information, kind of went back some of the things that we were hearing, just some parking configurations, maybe moving of the structure. Gitchi-Gami Trail obviously had a litany of different kind of problems. Those of you familiar with just that section, it's really a tight spot to be able to run a bicycle trail through safely, which is really important when it comes to this. So then CJ was able to take all that information that he got and look at some of the LiDAR data and other aerial information and start putting together all these different options. So that's where we're here tonight, to kind of present these for the first time, get the big ideas out there, be able to kind of see what sticks, looking for a lot of feedback, dialogue. Maybe there's an area that went a little too far, or just try to get some feedback on where we're at. So that's where this is meeting number 2 of this 3-meeting series. The third and final one, take the information that we get tonight and try to, specifically for the park, bring things down into a final design. Maybe with the trail, it ends up kind of being down to a 1 or 2, options. Ideally, just one after tonight. But that third meeting will be another public presentation similar to this evening. Kind of looking to finalize that document, and then any little revisions or changes that come from that, we can certainly make, and then look to put things into a report. In the past, we've been able to do this for a little while, where that document we've seen or kind of know what it needs to be in it when it comes to looking for extra funding, specifically with the park side of things, looking to get grant funding and everything, some cost estimates, explaining the process so far. Speaking of which, Victoria for moving matters here, I want to thank being able to bring in the food. As well as you can see, as I had the little snafu with my microphone earlier and the camera in the back, trying to enhance our public participation for those people who weren't able to be at the meeting, be able to record some of these presentations and get that onto a website that they'll be operating for us as well. That's where you can get some more public comment. Some of these designs will be able to be put up on there as well. Yeah, I think that's about it. So that's where I'm just getting, this is the first time for me seeing all of this stuff too, so I'm pretty excited to hear CJ explain it to everybody. So CJ, if you want to take it away.
Thanks. So we're going through 2 things tonight. The trail, we'll do that first, and then there's the Tofte Park piece, which is the shelter and looking at some improvements to the park. What I'm going to do is, hopefully you got a chance to at least get a little familiar with the boards on the wall. What I'm going to do is just go through these exact same boards. I'll blow them up on the screen, and we can look closer at both stretches. I'm going to blow this up so we can see it better. So what we have, what we've done so far is we've looked at, based on information we got last time and in the beginning of the conversation, where the trail could go. It did seem there was a sensible and a desire at least to have the trail along Tofte Park Road. It gets a lot of use. It connects to the park. We also talked about the north side of the road, which has a different trail experience, but maybe a viable option as well. We talked about the Bay Area, so a number of different options. Went back to the design table, and we came up with 2 main alignments, but there's a lot of different permutations with it, and it has to do with the need to cross the highway. Downstream, we're on the north side or the hillside of the highway, and upstream, we're on the lake side of the highway. So somewhere we have to cross, and there's really just that one crossing that can reasonably happen. We identified 4 crossing points. The first is here, where it basically ends today. The second is in the bay, and we'll get back to more of that later. The third is at Sawville, and then the fourth is where the trail picks up again, right at the other end. So it's taking it all the way on the north side. And there's 2 main options, and then obviously a lot of permutations when you start looking at where you cross. And obviously if we're crossing here, there is no more north route. So what I'm going to do is we'll go through this stretch first, and then we'll start over again. We'll come back down and we'll do the south stretch. And we'll look in more detail. There's a couple blow-up areas, if you notice those, are right over here. And the blow-up areas are at the check-in area at Bluefin, and then at the Coho Cafe, which were pretty tough areas to get the trail through. Can everyone see the hand? Does that work? If that's okay. So what I'll do is I'll go through the north side of the trail. Sorry, I gotta get the microphone. Sorry about that. So as we start on the north side of the trail, it's really the continuation of what you see out there today. We're basically just north of the ditch. We're following basically sort of close to the edge of right-of-way. What I'd say, the right-of-way data comes from the county. It's their database. I put approximate right-of-way on this because of. Is this in focus for everybody? Can you see enough? Because it has a margin of error. It's not locationally specific. It's probably pretty close, but I don't have a survey, and so there's not enough information that's been ground verified to know exactly where it is. That said, the aerial photos and the LiDAR data give us a pretty good idea of what's going on with grades. So we're able to take a pretty hard look and investigate the physical constraints out in the corridor. As you move along, there's a couple areas where we get into limited space. The right-of-way does jog with different properties, and so it moves closer to the road in some areas and further away in others. One of the other issues to deal with on the north side of the road is the number of driveway crossings. On the south route, there are not nearly as many. There's also some additional, there's an electric meter in this area, but this is where we get one of the jogs in right-of-way that becomes problematic. There's a solution to dealing with the jogs in right-of-way in limited space. The Holiday gas station is another area. In this area, having seen it today, what I would propose is that the trail actually moves down and that we fill the ditch in those areas, and you'd essentially pick up water movement in this area and install a culvert, and it could daylight back again when you have the space to actually bring the trail through. So part of this process, and what I want to make sure everybody knows, is it is a learning process. And it is concept design. It's not. We're not paid to engineer it. And so every time I come back, I learn something, and I also rely on you all to tell me what you know about the area. If things are looking way off, or there's a problem somewhere, to let me know, and we'll go back and make the changes. We're not saying that these are the solutions by any means. So it's just one step in that process. Back to Holiday Gas, we'd have to move that trail out and put a culvert under the road, or under the trail, and move the water essentially with the trail through that area. We'd cross this driveway and keep moving down. On the next sheet, this is one of our areas where we're actually having to move a power line. After today, I identified a number of other power lines that have guy wire issues as well. So the electric issue on the north side of the road is going to be a significant one. I know there's at least 12 poles that are going to be potentially in conflict. So, yep,
And they just buried a month ago fiber optic right under that area too.
Yeah.
Since you were here last, that's gone in.
okay, and that is north of the
It goes
power.
right across from that driveway there on Bluefin and cuts across and goes up the road by the Sawtooth Outfitters. They went right under the road and it runs right there where your path is.
Is it this side of the power line?
It's right where the path is. It goes
Yeah.
right underneath the power line. They just dug that in a month ago,
And it's fiber optic?
fiber optic.
Yeah, so that's a significant issue as well. Just to continue with it, this is the idea where here we had really no choice. The septic system is located right here. There's also a jog in the right of way. So here is we're showing it's a faint line, but there'd be a culvert inlet at this point. This would all get filled, and you take that culvert in all the way under the trail to this location where the creek daylights right here. We would have to fill this and put the creek in a culvert, and we could daylight it here again. Not wanting to, bury or put the creek in a pipe the whole way. The trail takes a jog in this area where the right of way becomes larger. I'll get to the next sheet.
And I think that creek, that goes under the highway.
Right up here it does.
Yeah.
It keeps going. So, let me keep going here. So at this point, this is where we were at the creek, flowing into a culvert. It could daylight again here, and then it crosses the road right here. That's where it comes down and out. So we can move uphill. It's problematic because of the slope here, and so you're looking at a pretty steep slope to cut into, and so you're going to need some rock at least for stabilization. There might be areas where there's some wall required, and then it's a likely candidate for guardrail as well because of the steep slopes that you're going to be running off it. Whether it's a wall condition or a rock-supported slope, the grades are significant enough where the recovery zone for a trail isn't significant enough, and you're going to have to guardrail it. So that becomes a cost issue. The trail begins to move back just because this condition here is so tight for this crossing, and then moves through the back edge of this wetland area. And this is the second crossing point, and I'll get back to it in a little bit, but here I've graded in a underpass for the highway. And this would be a 10-foot box culvert. And I'll come back to it when we jump on the other side, but there's potential to do that. As you move and continue on the north side, this again is another slope that's going to take a lot of grading. Ideally, the trail wants to be at 5% maximum, and this is graded to 8%. It's another situation where you're going to have you'll have some rock reinforcement of the slope. These are basically 5-foot contours from the grading that I had done. So you're having to cut a significant channel. You're filling, kind of coming into the slope, and then as you proceed through it, you're cutting down. So this is basically in a trough for a ways down into that depression. There's a driveway crossing here, and then the road continues up to the Sawbill, which is the third. Yep.
Does the relocation of the Sawbill Trail to the highway affect this at all? Or isn't that in the cards anymore?
I'm not aware.
Didn't they have a relocation?
Yes,
of
no,
Sawbill?
if they redo the highway, the Sawbill gets moved to the west, so that it comes in at a 90-degree angle from where it sits now.
Does it go like this?
Yeah.
I don't think it would impact the trail. In some ways, it might make it a little easier, even because it's so problematic on this side. Essentially, we can move along the road at this point and allow the drainage to work freely. This is that third crossing point, which is at the Sawbill. The efficiency here is that it's just a high-use area, and teaming up a crossing with an intersection is typically a good thing to do because drivers are more aware of crossings. As you cross the sawmill, then it's a real difficult situation again. There's buried infrastructure in here, there's a little bit of a wall, and then there's a ditch that moves water. So this is another condition where you'd have to fill all of this ditch and then have a pipe inlet at this point, taking your water in underneath all the way to this point, and then you could daylight the drainage again.
Also, when they relined it, I thought they were gonna have a turn lane coming from the north, taking a right onto the sawmill.
Yeah, there kind of is one right here right now. It's not striped as a turn lane, but it's basically a
Oh, so
striped
they're
shoulder.
not gonna widen the road to the point where the turn lane actually goes where the bike path is, huh?
You know, part of the follow-up that we'll be doing is talking to MnDOT, so it's, I think it's something that will get addressed. But I'll certainly ask the question, because it is tight. With filling of that ditch, you can maintain your grade separation and pavement separation from the road, and then continue on the north side. Essentially what's happening here would be moving up the upper edge of the ditch. And then this takes us to the end of the north route. So we basically moved up adjacent to some of the gravel area, and then we're on that a little bit of that higher terrace, if that makes sense, once you get over the top of the ditch. So it's a flatter area, and essentially we move all the way out just past the billboard, and then the crossing happens here, much like it does on this end already. So you have an at-grade crossing with the road, and then this is the trail where it picks up right now. So that's the existing portion of the trail. Any other questions on the north route right now?
I just had a question on a couple of those property owners in the beginning.
Yep.
Said the right-of-way kind of fluctuated a little bit.
Yep.
Would there be easement purchasing requirements in there, I would imagine?
It would either be easement purchasing, or else you'd be in a condition where you're filling the ditch and then having to put storm sewer infrastructure in with it. And so that's, the feasibility of doing that is also another question. The depth of the ditch is pretty good through a lot of that area in relation to the road. So it seems like you could get a pipe in of decent size, but it would have to be part of a stormwater study go along with the engineering of the trail. But those are the other options, is looking at that. And in general, there's already a number of areas where the storm sewer has to go in. There's not a good spot to get through. And so I was looking for solutions to minimize it as much as possible. But I don't know if there's a couple specific ones you were.
Well, back towards the beginning of you had one piece of property there that looks like the homeowner.
This one here.
And the right-of-way was, or the property line changed a little bit there.
Yep.
I'm wondering how many of those you identified.
Yeah, this is, other than these two right here, it was then down at the Sawtooth Outfitters. That was the next one where it became problematic. So, and in that location, because of the existing septic system, I just put it in the ditch and said you just go with a culvert solution there. This one, we're essentially riding right on the edge of that right away. But as soon as we start moving over into that ditch, we're going to be filling into that ditch slope. So again, it gets into, in my opinion, the further engineering study. And touching any of these ditches is going to be a MnDOT issue, so it's something that we'd have to review with them specifically to get a handle on what the stormwater capacity is of the ditch system and revisit that. Any other questions on the north side?
A box culvert, what do you estimate that? Is that, in your opinion, doable?
It is. well, I'll jump into it when we get down there. So so a couple things with the south route. Tofte Park Road makes a ton of sense because it's an existing paved surface. To get state and federal funds to pay for that trail, it would not work because of the standards that you're held to for building a trail. To stripe a trail on the road, the drive lanes would be under 10 feet. They would be at a maximum of 9 feet apiece. And so you don't have enough space to designate a shared use road with a trail. And so it couldn't be built. What I had shown here is this trail with a 5-foot separation from the road. The thing that I don't have in this area is property information that makes that shows us what's going on. The property lines in here are a little bit odd, so I'm not exactly sure what goes on with the ownership of this road or what type of public ownership there is to either side of the road.
I think it's only has a 33-foot easement,
33-foot easement for
the entire blacktop,
the entire blacktop. Okay.
on the entire roadway.
Yeah. So you're not 33 foot from center line. That's a full
No.
foot. It's just 33 feet. So this would be, unless it has an offset center to that 33 feet, it would be very difficult to do this, depending, I guess, on the ownership. Sorry, I just sort of jumped here. With that 5-foot offset, you are at a buildable standard for the funding that's available to build the trail. This is what it looks like as it moves towards the parking lot. The thing that I would say about the Tofte Park Road is that it doesn't work from a funding strategy point for this funding source. And if it is, the other way to think about the road is that it does not have to be part of the state designated trail. And so the town could elect to look at the trail as a shared road with bikes, and it's essentially letting it operate like it does today. There's things that you can do with painting and signage to raise awareness for drivers that there's bikers on the road. And the other thing is that it tells the bikers how to get from point A of the Gitchi-Gami trail to point B. Yep.
Could it be turned into a one-way road and use it?
It could.
But I'm gonna drive the other way anyways. Calling the sheriff right now.
Yeah, it could. We didn't look at that, but dimensionally it could. That is an option to think about how that road could still function as part of a trail system. So it's not inherently impossible. We did look at routing the trail through the park, and it just doesn't work. Primarily the grades through this area are prohibitive, again, certainly for this a trail, but even going beyond the maximum design standards, you're going way beyond them to try and get a trail, a multi-use trail, which is typically your 10-foot minimum width through this area, looking at the steepness of the slopes and the radiuses of the turns. So we went through and looked at it, but it's not a good feasible bikeway is the result. And then at the far end here of the Tofte Park Road, maybe better just to go to the next slide. So here the trail could take a split option, and looking at a potential easement type of situation to come off the back sides of both of these properties up to the highway, or continuing along the edge of the road in this case, where the trail actually comes out and meets the road, and then back up to the intersection. So again, if there was a striping solution for the road and it was a non-state trail, that state trail would begin at this point and then move forward down right away. Once we get to the road, the trail can be maintained as a road-separated trail. And so there's a planted median. It's roughly about 11 feet at this end, and it narrows down to about 7 feet of width at this end. The storm water that moves along this ditch would also need to get addressed. And so whether or not this space in here can handle storm water or not is something, again, that would have to be studied with the storm water. But it's a viable solution. Otherwise, you're looking at building in some stormwater capacity again underneath the trail. We'll get back to this site with the blow up, but this is the bluefin check-in and the area next to it and how it could potentially be configured. The trail moves through here, and there's two options for this area, and I'll get into both of those. On the other side of the main entrance to Bluefin, that trail continues in that direction. And then I've got the blow-ups of the Bluefin check-in here. So this is an existing check-in. I was encouraged to look at a scenario where the parking in front of the check-in is removed and is actually relocated into this facility. And it's understood that it's essentially accepted non-complying use to have parking here and moving into right-of-way. This could be a potential solution that allows the trail to come through, and really an ideal situation. This would be the new check-in at Bluefin, and their operation could function well with parking space behind as well as drive-up space, whether you're coming from either direction, to stop and get into the new check-in facility.
Question.
Yep.
Is that in Bluefin's plans right now to take the old bank building and use that as a check-in center?
I'm not exactly sure what their plans are, but Dennis asked me to look at this, so I just figured it was. But we didn't get into any specifics about what they're doing. I think it. Anyhow, he encouraged me.
Well, we know that Bluefin will be using that building. It's just a matter of would it be for check-in or administration.
He said he would. It's possible the check-in would move there and to look at it. So.
Road to see what it has, that'd be really.
This is the change that you would need to make it work. If the check-in is here, to not have the traffic doing things like this. And so you have actually a real easy connection here to punch through, and then you can get into the network of Bluefin drives and parking areas. As you move along the trail, this would be kind of a trail rest area. And what I've shown here is a kiosk, a bench, a couple bike racks, and a fix-it station. And a fix-it station is it's essentially a stand that's got cabled tools, all the bike tools you need. There's a pump in with it. They're made, it's kind of an industrial strength set of bike tools, and it's actually got a rack that you can lift up and put on your bike on it. So it's a real nice resource for a state trail. We've worked on some other projects where we've installed these. Bikes do break down quite a bit, so that they do get used. And this becomes a little wayside for bikers. The kiosk could have information about the Gitchi-Gami Trail, about wayfinding around town, local businesses, the park. It can really go on from there, but it could be an opportunity to do interpretation as well. So there's a little stopping area here, basically building off of the entry point to that facility. So I think it was a notion kind of based on the geometries here. You've kind of got this slice that could turn into a nice space for people to stop along the trail. There is an alternate to this where we're not relocating and reconfiguring, or we're not moving the check-in. And this is essentially what I'd come up with before talking to Dennis. And what happens is we still have maintained the grade, the pavement separation from the road. This area here, basically the trail runs through it, and this spot right here is the current parking spot for the cars. And what this does is it formalizes a turning lane into Bluefin, and it also provides a parallel parking spot for 3 cars And then the bike trail has enough space to move through with a 3-foot offset, the concrete behind where you park, and a concrete pad also in front of the bluefin check-in. So you have a little bit of a conflict point with bikers and people getting out of cars, but there is some space here for door swing and some of those issues. So it actually works out okay. This solution from a MnDOT standpoint might be marginal at best. So it's I don't get my hopes up with that one, but it's a solution nonetheless. I don't know if in general there's just would be no parking along the road at all is the response that we would get. So moving past the main entrance to Bluefin, I was also encouraged to look at this passage down. The trail can move behind this facility and then move downhill at 5% grade and essentially meet up with the bituminous trail that's here right now before you get to the boardwalk. A lot of discussion from the last meeting about the boardwalk across the bay. And I looked at a number of different permutations on how the boardwalk could work. None of them are easy, and they're all essentially cost prohibitive. These colored diagrams show different configurations that we studied across the bay. Cantilevering essentially right off the top, so you have an elevated structure that's footed along the roadside. The other is looking at matching. The red, by the way, is essentially where the existing boardwalk is right now, and these two footings are the existing footings of the boardwalk. I got the construction details from Dennis to investigate this option of just extending it by building another footing. So there's an option here where we could raise grade and bring in this green version. It requires a guardrail, which is a 54-inch rail, and that would run along the entire length of the bay. The red version is the extension of the boardwalk, so just maintaining the inside edge and building outward. These dashed lines are 3-to-1 slopes, and that becomes, these either become elevated, or if they're fill projects, this becomes riprap. The blue version is actually digging in the trail to the hillside and then building the trail across. With a 10-foot trail, you need a 2-foot zone where there's no vertical impediments. You also need some recovery zone when you're matching up to 3-to-1 slopes, so it gets a little bit complicated. But there is a solution here that we could fit it in. The main issue with that is that it requires walling. It's a 500-foot stretch. This area in here requires about a 5.5-foot wall. The constructability of trying to dig a footing here and the chase back towards the road is the construction would be extremely difficult. The access is poor, and it's tough to see any other wall system other than something that's piled, whether it's sheet pile or a pile crib type of wall that you could run all the way along and be doing your excavation as you move along. All of these are extremely expensive. I ran a number of scenarios and I didn't come up with a solution that's less than $400,000 to get across the bay, and I'm not even real comfortable with that number being attainable. So you have a very difficult situation to get through. So it'll be a tough one. We're doing a project right now where we're actually building one of these. We've got a lot of specific details to tell us exactly what our options are as far as decking. We're looking at, instead of using a wood, using a concrete plank because of the texturing and the difficulties with slippage and bikes on extended wood tracks. So there's a lot that goes into trying to put bikes on any type of elevated structure, and in this case it's difficult. Another impact of this kind of upper cast out is that you're going to lose most of the trees along that stretch right through here as well. I got some other comments just too about there's something nice about the boardwalk as it sits today. It's a nice quaint walk. The environment of being on the bay. in my opinion, would probably be diminished by bringing in a structured element with guardrail along the entire stretch. So in my mind, there's just that question of what are you building at the end of the day as well. The other option here is similar to the Tofte Road, which is we can bring the state trail out to some point, and there is an easement in place, so potentially we could bring state trail down to a spot and then look at connecting to the existing boardwalk and making it a walk-only section. And there's different things you can do with some built structures to get bikers to literally stop. Not a big deal for walkers to kind of snake through. We've done other things with bollards and some chains where you essentially kind of neck off the trail and just leave a small spot that bikers can't blast through. So I would have a little bit of concern with the slopes here and just people not wanting to slow down, but there are things that you can do that can be incorporated as nice design elements as well. That would literally get the bikers to stop, and then you would walk across the bay on the boardwalk and then continue on the other side.
See, if that were the scenario, before it drops down, if you're heading east and before it drops down to the boardwalk,
Yep.
you could also provide a connection to the highway. So if a biker felt comfortable taking the highway wanted to take the highway instead of walking across the boardwalk, they could.
Easy, yeah. And right here at this intersection, I think if you wanted to do some striping or something to make it more formal, absolutely. If they're comfortable doing it, it's kind of a narrow shoulder up there, but
Oh, there is no shoulder.
yeah.
I just walked it an hour ago, and most of that is falling into the lake, so.
Yeah.
I would say it's suicide to take that. You'd lose a lot of bikers.
Yeah. So getting across the bay, leaving the boardwalk in place as it is a real viable option. Back to the box culvert, what happens to make this work is it's not deep enough to make it work. With some grading, you could get it to work. I would not say that this is a absolute solution. I don't have a survey, and the depths that I got the trail to are not that bad compared to what's there now. It's lowering it a couple feet, and it looks like we're right at that 3-foot threshold of fill over the top of the box culvert. What it does require is digging out and lowering a portion of the wetland so you can have a point to bring water to, because as you lower here, you'll be in the lowest spot of the wetland, so it requires some extra excavation. You'd also need a standpipe to take water, and this is the opportunity then to move that water out, that standpipe, and a drainage could be brought underneath the trail and then daylighted out at this point. So in an overflow situation, there is capacity to do that. So a couple of things. One is this can't be vetted truly until it gets engineered and a survey is done so you know the exact conditions. And then two, a stormwater study would have to be conducted to make sure that that works and to see what size storm pipe you need to take the water out. But the grades work out. It slopes through the culvert all the way out to the other side, and so everything is kind of connecting in at that point. So there is potential there to do that, but it would have to get vetted at another point in time. It's a compelling thing to look into just because of the safety factor, to get people across the highway in that manner. So if the trail is on the north side of the road, I think it's worth the time once additional information is put together to take a pass at it and see if it really works. So moving forward from there, so these are a series of options. If the trail were to continue through, we have a trouble point here. This is a 16% grade, so it's really steep. We would essentially be utilizing the Bluefin parking lot and their driveway for the trail. I did take a look at, and Dennis asked me to take a look at this as well, is could you bring the trail this way? Depending what happens here and if the boardwalk is in place, it's going to be a very difficult termination for that. This slope runs down at a 12% and stops right at the boardwalk. So it's a difficult thing to do, and it requires wall from this point essentially all the way up to the top near the driveway. So that becomes another expensive endeavor. It may be that there is a kind of midterm solution where if a portion of the boardwalk were removed, the grades could pick up sooner and we could lower the overall grade of the entire trail, regrade through this area. There is a low spot here in a wetland, but that's what this light dash through here is could you do this course as well? I didn't have a chance to talk to Dennis about it. We're in his easement and then jumping out of it around his building there as well. There'd certainly be some construction easement that's needed. The constructability of this wall, again, is something we'd have to look at because of the slopes and the difficulty of trying to get a wall in this condition with the limited space to work. But it's a possibility that this could be another option. And between now and the next time we meet, that's another thing I'll be looking at. So as you move along, then you have either a kind of a striped shared driveway condition up to the top, or you're moving in through this direction, and you've got the separated trail again. Then as you move past the commercial fishing museum, there is space here to do it, and so we've sort of maximized out to the right-of-way edge. And then as we come over towards the Coho property, we'll get back to this in just a second, but this is the blow-up area where we studied that in further depth. So here's the Coho passing. So this was the other area that I was encouraged to look at. Here's that trail coming in with the the pavement separation. We've got their through lanes, our turn lane, and a shoulder, median at 8 feet, Gitchi-Gami trail at 10 feet. At this point, as we get up to the road again, it could become state trail. So the first thing we looked at, it wasn't the first thing we looked at, but after our discussion, I was asked to look at removing the parking from in front of the Coho and expanding the parking, which is right here right now in this direction. By building a retaining wall up to this point and all the way over, it ties in to grade in about right here. You can replace all of the parking that exists in front of the Coho Cafe right now, including the number of parking stalls here. It's a little bit hard to count because it's tough to know how people actually park, but I actually think we might have one or two more stalls in this configuration than actually happens out here right now. This parking becomes a little more contained and formalized on this side as well. So what that does is it opens up the opportunity to have over an 8-foot separation. There's a paved shoulder that's 8 foot as well off of the 12-foot drive lane. So we have good separation from the road. And then we have a nice community space essentially in front of the businesses. I looked at this similar to the area over at Bluefin where we have a number of bike racks and then a fix-it station over on this side. There's a paved area, then sort of an arcing path that makes a solid connection from the parking lots all the way over to both businesses and sort of vice versa. This is a small seat wall that's in front of the businesses as well. So it really kind of becomes a gathering point again for trail users, whether you're walking or biking. And then there's some plantings as well there for just some enclosure and relief from the highway. There's kind of small planted areas as well that move all the way out to the edge of the trail. So the bike stalls are here, and then, yep.
Where is the property line, existing property line? Is that the dotted line?
The property line is running right here. And you gotta just kind of follow my fingers as it comes through, and it runs all the way out. You can see it picking up here again. So the rendering blocks out that property line, but it runs right through here. If you cast the line from there to there in your mind, it's running just off the back.
So they're parking right now. They're parking partially on the when they're perpendicular to the highway. They're part of the car is hanging on the public lands or public highway.
The backs of the cars actually get out of right away, but the movement to get out of the parking stalls takes you into the road right away. So again, it's kind of this edge, understood but unaccepted, non-compliant use.
Yes, both of those properties had very interesting public hearings at the courthouse and were passed for that conditional use. So.
Yep. And in some ways, it functions well, the environment and the character of the community and the behavior of the traffic seems to be well. I don't know, or at least no one's told me of any accidents that have happened here or at the other site with people backing out, but,
There was one a few years ago in front of the guest services with a local person.
Yeah.
Backed out.
There's been a few.
There's been a few. At the fishing museum, their sign is right to the side of the building, and does this come close to that sign?
Yeah, I'd have to take another look to see
Okay.
exactly where it is.
Because they're thinking about doing some landscaping, but
Okay. Yeah, this is the right-of-way line right here, as it passes the fishing museum. And I don't know if that sign that you're talking about is
Yeah.
the shadow lines that we're looking at right there,
Okay.
part of it, but I'll have to take a closer look at it. So this is the one option to get past the businesses here, and that is that third crossing point and how that would essentially just tie in. This was the other option for crossing, and it is a real problematic area. There is no good solution for getting the trail through any of this area. It's privately owned, but just physically, it's virtually impossible to get the trail through any place. So you're kind of bound to the road. This condition here is we could maintain that separation from the pavement here, and then we were sort of skipping along with a potential pavement separation at this point as well. This could become a planted area, so sort of replicating what's there now, although there's a little shift to it. There's additional striping alongside of the road for driver awareness. As you move along the front of the business, then you're in a situation, this makes it a little bit clearer. And I guess I misspoke. The cars are hanging into the right-of-way, so I apologize, I was wrong there. The cars are hanging into the right-of-way, and then they'd be backing out over the trail as well. This technique of the trail, and this literally is a proposed painted green trail, so the whole pavement gets painted, is a technique that's being used all over the country and has been implemented successfully in a number of different places. I don't know of any case where it's been done on a trunk highway. So that would be definitely pushing the envelope and does not fit into any book of standards from a MnDOT perspective. So it would be a long discussion to figure out how you would deal with something like this. I think MnDOT certainly recognizes the importance of the trail, but this would be a problematic area to do it. It gets us back to, again, how we would pay for it with state money or federal money, and otherwise looking at it from using different funding sources and trying to get at least permission from the state or the district office to do that in MnDOT right away. There might be some ways to actually build something like that. But we don't have many other good solutions other than something like this. Any other permutations in here just move the cars further away from the building and cause the back out movements further into traffic. So it's a tough one to get through without the capacity to do what was shown in that last option.
And you had talked to Dennis, and he's willing to do that.
I was shocked. I didn't come up with the ideas. He said, dude, see how much parking you can get in and look at taking out all the parking in front of the building. So,
well, the parking in front of that building is problematic. I drop my kid off the bus there every day, and
yeah.
That's not a good spot.
You know, and the other solution, it's from a business standpoint, you can replace and potentially even get another stall in there too. It's safer. It's a defined parking area, both of them. The hinge point there is it requires a significant retaining wall. The retaining wall at this end is going to be roughly about 7 feet tall, so it's not a minor retaining wall.
But looking at the cost of doing some of those things and keeping what is probably a much more aesthetically pleasing trail to the south side of the highway, you know, there's some significant cost to filling those ditches on the north side of the highway as well.
No doubt about it. I don't,
I mean, that's a tremendous amount of fill to
It-
fill those ditches.
as I'll get to my summary in a little bit, but it's, you're on my line of thinking. The other thing, you know, I called it a community space, but even from a business owner standpoint, there might be some compelling thinking there from a business standpoint. Drive-up parking is always the number one thing. You want people to park at your front door. For a place like this where you have a lot of local traffic, from local residents as well as tourists, this might look more interesting from that standpoint. So yes,
But you said it was out of the question to go below the coal hole, which is Highway 1, the old highway, run right straight behind the coal hole, all the way to Jerry Lowe's. It comes back out on Highway 61.
yeah.
That was the original highway.
The original highway was below the coal hole. And it goes all the way through to Jerry Lowe's and comes back out on the Highway 61 at Jerry Lowe's.
Through, and it came right through here,
No, a little above that,
up here.
right there. All the way through there, that was the old highway.
And so there's a couple,
I don't understand, you said that the terrain was so, boy, it's perfectly flat all the way through there.
through this spot right here.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can get down to that point within grades. The other issue is, I guess the question I have is this property in public ownership?
Is what?
Is it publicly owned, the old highway right away?
No.
Okay.
That back part
It's
behind
private.
Coho and Water's Edge is used for deliveries.
Right.
Yeah.
But it could be even a little bit below that.
Could be a shed, a shed road.
That would be dicey.
You got some other congestion down there because you got parking for
When you
several of
move
the
behind the
town.
coal hole and then
Yeah.
peel down to.
And that option that you
That's
showed up
more
there, I
parking
think, you know, if that were to be brought to fulfillment, that would make a very nice addition to our town. It'd be a very unique area for people who are biking on the trail to stop. I was fortunate to do a lot of biking in Iowa earlier this spring, and they have a lot of those little kiosk areas along their trail systems, and they're used a lot, and they're nice. So you bike from point A to point B, and they have these little kiosk areas next to restaurants or something, and you can stop, get off your bike, and check your tires, and go in and get something like bike speed or something. And
All the
seems to get a tremendous amount of
parking
use
for all the businesses.
down there.
That would eliminate all that.
I can keep looking at it. That issue here is that this one is a little bit easier to see. These are 1 foot contours. We run into a couple problems. One is the 10% grades. It's I think it's 11% grade that runs down this driveway, and then this is all 1 foot contour on this back slope. This is existing condition, the contour lines. So it gets flat right here, but the filling that's been done over time on this edge, you'd be cutting in through all of this. And the other issue is if it isn't on public land again, you're looking at finding a funding source to get all of this stretch built, or I don't know how you'd build it on an easement of someone else's.
You'd have to purchase easements.
Yeah.
Well, Dennis owns all that, but
He might be. I'll
I'm just
ask
saying
him.
it'd be an option for losing all that parking on that property.
Well, in the real issue, the biggest constraint is getting from here down because it's so steep. The other thought I just had is that if there isn't a way to stay down, and then coming up through this
Yeah,
could be an option.
What's the maximum percent of grade you put on the trail?
Well, it's the standards are a little bit flexible because they understand that 5% is the ideal maximum. They understand that there's conditions where you can't build a trail where it doesn't go over 5%. When you start to double and triple that, it gets real difficult. So,
She doesn't want to.
When you speak about landscaping and benches and kiosks, who puts that in and then who maintains it all?
Still be there.
I don't know. The idea would be that it would be built on the public space portion of it as a trail amenity in this kind of wayside trail. And that would open it up to different types of funding. So you can fund the interpretation, and the wayfinding also opens it up for funding as well from different sources. And then there's an overlap with that private property. But in kind of going back and looking at where that property line sits, which basically runs right here. A good portion of these facilities, the interpretive panel, the fix-it station, a portion of the pavement, concrete paving, and the bike racks could all be on public land, which would make them eligible for, and technically the trail funding could pay for some amenity improvements as well, like bike racks and things. If it became a multi-funded project, the lines are literally drawn in space on those property lines, and the bids reflect the amount of square footage of pavement from one to the other, and the different pots of money pay for it. So that was the thinking, at least. And then the other option then is for the private property owner to contribute some money as well. So
that landscaping, like in front of Water's Edge and Coho, would be up to those owners.
I'd say it would certainly be up to the owners for a couple of reasons. One, the stuff up on the building is theirs, and it could get reconfigured with a project like this. I think it would make sense. And then two, the plantings that are further up on these little bays here would become a maintenance issue as well. I believe I already maintain the island plantings that are up on the parking lot area, kind of right in here. So I think there's a precedent there for that type of use, but without the adjacent property owner agreeing to some kind of maintenance, it probably wouldn't be a good decision, and maybe better just all paved. So that's the way I would look at it. I've worked on some other projects where the adjacent owners are actually required to sign an agreement for maintenance on amenity improvements and streetscape projects. It happens in municipalities quite a bit, so there's different mechanisms to get some guarantees, at least on paper, that people will continue with the maintenance of the improvements they want to see. So that was that option, and this one. The last stretch then are there any other questions on the pass from the business area here? I'll keep going with the rest of the trail. Moving along then through the rest of the trail could continue on the lake side of the road, past the driveway, and it's okay for a little bit, and then the grading becomes a little bit difficult because of the slope off the road. I did some grading studies, and you do end up taking down some trees. That right-of-way edge is right here on the outside, but it's doable. It might be, there's a little bit more filling and cutting to do with the trail through that area, so it's a little more expensive portion with the grading constructability of it. But it's viable all the way down. There's a couple areas where some of the grading that I was running where it was jumping over the right-of-way. Those are typically handled with grading easements for construction. You could look at other design solutions as well that might eliminate some of that grading if it's a small wall of some type, and looking at how far the trail really is from the roads. There might be some different ways to ensure that the grading doesn't pop over that right-of-way edge, but it would continue along. There's space for it, and it would make its way up and connect to the existing trail. So it's a lot to digest. I'm going to go back to this first slide. So we're looking at kind of the differences in the different versions of, depending on where you cross. And initially, because of the complexity of dealing with this area and then the bay and some of these areas, that really thought that the north side of the road was going to be the sort of hands-down way to build it, get it done. And the part of what I'll need to do moving forward is continue to evaluate some of the barriers. Not having the utility survey and where guy wires are located and seeing some of the conditions out there today, there's going to be some considerable cost in dealing with that electric and the degree to which it needs to be moved. There is options to put in additional poles and guy wire off the other poles, so you essentially kind of bridge over the trail to another pole and take it down. You could maintain your height clearance, which is 10 feet for trail. So there might be some ways to do things that are a little less expensive than just relocating poles, but it's not exactly an easy solution. And with the storm sewer and kind of filling of the ditch, the cost could get pretty expensive. So from the kind of analyzing the cost, and there's $750,000 right now to build the trail. It becomes tight really quick with the funds, and so the cost argument isn't as clear as it used to be. Both sides are more of on an equal claim than I originally thought. The solution where this section becomes a locally striped trail on the road, and this becomes a locally owned walking connection between this segment of state trail and this segment of state trail, maybe has the most viability with existing funding. It's simply a square footage game with the trail. There's less pavement to put down, there's less construction to do, considerable less when you take this out of the mix. So I'm not sure how all of the stakeholders and people that'll be building trail feel about it, but in my mind it may have some viable strategy to it, that you look at it from that perspective. I think there's also probably an understood use of this road as kind of a bike route anyhow. I know there's a lot of people leaving here and biking down to Temperance. It does also, and it supports some of that existing use. The things that you could do with the road would be painting bike symbols and then chevrons, on either side of the bike symbol. Those usually get done in conjunction with a stripe, and it's the indication that this is a bikeway and that's a shared use road. In this case, because it's so tight, it really just becomes an awareness sign, which usually say share the road, and have a car and a biker on both of them on a sign. And so I think awareness for drivers would be a good thing to do, along with painting the road pavement itself. So it's really, it doesn't fit into a state standard, but if it is paid for in different ways and is sort of maintained as a bikeable local road, it's a real feasible option. That would then allow still the state trail to be built through this portion, and potentially through some of this all the way back up to the connection point there. So I think looking at this mix of connection points, there's some precedent for it, I believe, with the Gitchi-Gami Trail, if I understood some of our discussion earlier. And so that may be another viable way to do it. Yep.
You mentioned the bike trails or the striping on the Tofte Park Road. If you were to factor in the cost of construction on the north side of the road, from the junction down here up there, is going to cost X amount of dollars. Striping the Tofte Park Road is going to cost X minus a heck of a lot.
Yep.
How about hitting it in the middle somewhere? What would the cost be to widen the Tofte Park Road, so you have a separate bike lane? Wouldn't that be a lot cheaper than building on the north side?
I don't believe so. but it could be. It gets to the complexity of the stormwater facilities that you'd have to put in place by routing that trail on the north side. Widening the road to some degree requires road reconstruction as well, so you'd have to look at how that really works.
So that has been thought of.
Yeah, and it's a constructability issue to some degree because you'll be rebuilding a portion of the road. In some way, you could think of maybe doing it as kind of a reclaim project. That might be a possibility, or a mill and partial excavation of the road and reconstructing that with the trail and having that paving surface running that along. But you're going to have to chew into the road if you want to connect it to the trail. You're going to have to excavate at the edge to build that trail, so you have something that's going to have to get removed.
Yeah, and there is a substantial ditch along the route.
Yeah.
And that's private property too.
It is
Yeah.
private property, yeah. I guess my concern is, you're gonna, if you're on the north side of the highway, it would seem to me that there's a lot of bikers who would have who would be crossing the highway anyway just to get down to the lake.
Yep.
I mean, there are so few spots along here where people can actually go down and sit on a rock by the lake, and the little kids can go in and dip their feet in the water. It just seems to me to be a no-brainer to have the bike trail on the south side of the highway to that stretch, so that people would use the park, and because that's where they're going to go anyway, no matter what your signage says.
Yeah. Some of I agree. The other thing is, does the Gitchi-Gami Trail have any shared road segments?
Oh, we do.
Sure.
Back just up north.
Yeah,
Right
past Lutzen.
Right up
County
here,
Road 34.
Along the street road.
County Road 34 up there, and then right up
It's
here in
continuous
Orange.
pavement.
It's a mile long road.
And it's not marked for any bike path. Everybody gets along.
And in front of Horax too, coming up,
Right.
and all those driveways share that too.
We have some signage up there that says shared, it's got a picture of a bike on it.
There hasn't been any problems.
Other than I've heard of a couple minor problems with some traffic, but it's basically not.
Well, where I met you guys today when I was walking my dog,
Yep.
just beyond that's shared road.
And it's continuous pavement.
Well, it continues up to Chateau Road.
Yeah, and so from the center line, it's drive lanes and the pavement doesn't break.
Well, it goes right through Horax property. I mean, I don't know the technicalities of it, but when the trail was put in, it was either go up to the highway or utilize the roadway that was there. And
Okay.
so they utilized the roadway that was there, and the owners got the benefit of pavement.
Did that?
There's no striping on that road.
We'd like to put it on there, but we don't have it's a county road. It'd be nice to have something on there, so it does remind the public that it is a shared road.
But the thing with the Tofte Town Park Road is that has been used as a walking, biking road since forever. People have always walked that road, and there's something about the way the road is with the trees and stuff has a quieting effect. People don't go roaring through there. It's a very subdued road. People go to drive that road to kind of like slow down a little bit and downshift a notch.
Well, the question really is where the right-of-way sits, because I think you could do it. Your minimum lane widths for driving would be 10 feet, and you have a 33-foot right-of-way on the road.
Well, bikes they just drive can't it just be like it is now?
It could, the big concern I have, and we'll dive into it more as we proceed, is, it really looks like available funding can't pay for the full construction in any option, other than one where you're not building certain segments of trail.
And to take, just the one thing that bothers me about the lower Tofte Trail is where it crosses the highway.
Yep.
From the upper side, when you're going down, you can see really, really well. You can see people on the trail when you're driving, and when you're on the trail, you can see traffic. If that were to be the main option, there would have to be some sort of a landing. Because right now, by Sugar Beach, you come up and you're sitting on the highway at a very steep angle. There is no landing where you're up and flat. So vehicles tend to come up there very sharply.
Exactly what you're talking about, yeah.
And if you're driving people on bikes, you can't see them. And they can't see you because they're down, and all of a sudden they're up and trying to make that grade, and you're coming, and that would need to be filled and graded so that the cars can come up and have a landing, and the bikes can have a landing so they can stop and look before they cross the road.
You know, you could actually, you know that road intersection, it splits. I'm sure MnDOT's not actually cool with that either. I mean, you could almost make an argument for kind of reconstructing that into a proper intersection in the first place.
Yeah.
And that could include a trail until you get down to that lower section and then jump on the road.
For the striped bike lanes, what are they, about 4 feet wide?
If they're split, yeah. If they're one way on either side of the road.
Okay, because I know we were driving Summit Avenue in St. Paul last weekend, and it's got curbing on both sides. You've got basically a line of traffic, you've got another line of parking, and then you've got, I'm going to say, at least a 4-foot bike lane just restricted for bikers only, all on the same piece of pavement. And Summit Avenue gets a heck of a lot of traffic.
So, kind of getting back to that road question, in widening it, one is the question of whether you want to widen the road or not. If you did, and you were to assume that the center line of that road at 22 feet of width matches up with the center of the right-of-way, you have 11 feet of pavement on one side of the right-of-way, and the center of the right-of-way is 16 and a half feet. So you're going to get up to almost 28 feet, which gets pretty close to this 8 feet of space adjacent to two 10-foot lanes for the trail. So you could stripe a two-way facility on one side of the trail, or you could do kind of 4 foot on either side of the road.
But if you widen that road, if you start bringing that road a lot wider, it's going to lose the character of that road.
Understood.
It just doesn't seem necessary. I walk and bike that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's
People
just-
all respect each other. I've walked there all the time, and I've never had an issue.
I walk my dogs down there at least twice a week, and there's bikes and cars and dog walkers.
And everybody uses it respectfully.
It's fine.
Because of the narrowness of the road and the way the trees are, I think people get it.
Well, I think upright signage and painting the road for driver awareness and biker walking awareness is a good strategy. And painting is very cheap compared to trail and road construction. And not knowing exactly where more funding would come from, it may be a strategy for at least phasing work. But you could identify a connected loop. The only other thing, this is kind of some general comments we're talking about both sides. To me, part of what was nice about the north side of the road was that it's understood the use that happens on the south side. And if you were able to get the trail along the north side, and you were able to patch together, this piece, and you have a crossing here, and so you have this sort of almost really existing use that already happens here, you do have kind of this nice circuit through both sides of the road and almost the entire sort of business district, if you want to call it that, for Tofte. So to me that was one thing about the north side of the road that I liked. But it certainly has a more compelling discussion on the south side of the road with activity. Yeah.
I mean, I'm on the Gitchi-Gami Trail Board. I've been involved with many design projects. This is my input to the township. One idea costs more money, the other saves. If you're using the current Tofte Park road, there is money, the state park road account that can be used to repave that. The township supervisor used it to repave, Father Barragas Crossroad and the shorter Tote Road. So you save money there. And I don't consider that too much of a cost burden. That option that you said was cost prohibitive about having the trail above the boardwalk out. You said 400,000 still might be a little low, but I know it's extremely costly to do a box culvert. It was over 350,000 for the one by Onion River, and I believe they spent over $1 million putting under the railroad track by Silver Bay. Those options are very costly. The township rather put some of that money, if it's, let's say 250,000 more, into having something higher. You don't have to dip down, keeping it high. You don't have the grade issues. Personally, I think I would pursue it. They are seeking bonding money a year from now, but those requests I believe are due in June, and that could be added, my opinion.
Yeah, June 24th, they want the request.
One of the areas I've always been concerned about is the parking. Because I've worked in the community, there's parking in Schroeder. If there could be something a little more designated at the park for parking, because then you don't get to anything until you're up at the Ski Hill Road. And a lot of times people will park in the business area. They'll park at the Tofte Ranger Station. And so I think that says, okay, so this is what we have, so let's get it on a map so that they know, where the 3 designated areas are.
I think what Jenny is saying just a little bit, we had talked about making Birch Grove a designated parking area for the trail system.
Mm-hmm.
We had actually looked into having a rest area, and part of the thing with the gazebo and that outdoor bathroom that we have there, that was part of the discussion, is that would be designated as a parking staging area for people that wanted to use the trail. So the township has talked about that.
Okay.
Is that area on this side of Peelos or Stockies or whatever it is now, is that state-owned? This is, I'm saying, on top of the hill before you go down to Chateau. Is that state-owned land? Been voted on?
Yeah. Well, that's.
That has how many acres there? Is that a full 40 there?
I'm not exactly sure of that.
That's it with the gravel pit across the road, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, is that available for parking?
It's full of dirt. You talking about the Midcott land across from
Across from the pit.
Or where that pullout is right now.
Where that small turnoff is now, yeah.
That's where they want to make that wayside rest and that viewing area down over the
And
cliffs.
wouldn't that be available for parking?
One would think so.
I would think so too, yeah. Since it's publicly owned.
We did hear from citizens of that area that they didn't want parking there.
There?
Yes.
How many citizens are there?
Okay, fine. We heard from a citizen.
Okay, you heard from a citizen. Okay.
That's Stocky on one side, and you got 2 on the other.
Great, not bad.
People park up there all the time now, anyway. It's a designated cell phone hotspot. Semis, tankers, all sorts of people that park.
See, the highway patrol there quite frequently.
Yes, you do.
Border Patrol, all the people.
I make a lot of my calls there.
The pullout itself is actually really close to the private property line, I think. I think it is in the public property area, but I'm not, it's really close.
Is that the Marshall property?
Yes.
Yeah, Bob Marshall.
Well, Bob's the one who's, was pushing for this anyhow, so I don't think you'd have any issue with him.
He's the one who didn't want to park.
Yeah.
No shit. He's the one, he bugged me for
Wait, let me
years
put-
to
let me-
carry this forward.
Listen,
to
just hang on. He said he didn't want parking in a roundabout way. He talked about wanting to open up that area over the cliffs as a site where people could go walk down to. But he only wanted it for bike people. He didn't want people from the road coming down. That's what I was told.
That's what I heard in the first beginning of it.
Okay. Oh, well, all right.
Well, that's the end of that.
Okay.
Are there any other comments? Yes.
It's from the Gitchi-Gami people. I like using the old road, the Park Road, as it is. It seems like, there's a lot of, people have given a lot of good reasons why it already is used that way. And to me, you save an awful lot of money, and I'd love to see this thing come in at the rate the money we have, so we can do it rather than waiting another 5 years. So we save a lot of money there. Maybe we get through the bay and through some of the businesses. Maybe there's some more money available to help get through those areas.
And speaking of that boardwalk, I ride my bike along there, and I've gotten off and walked my bike along the boardwalk. And it's such a pleasant walk.
Yeah, I
It's
agree
not.
with that,
It
too.
is not a big deal to get off your. I mean, most bikers are out there for the exercise. It's a chance to give your hiney a little rest from that hard seat, and it is such a beautiful walk. It's like you really don't mind. You enjoy it.
And a chance to cool off.
Yeah. No, I just don't see that as being a real issue. I think it makes the trail unique.
I personally, this isn't from any real design perspective, but I don't see any issue with having bikers have to stop and manage speed at points. In the realm of trying to engineer these things, it's just like a vehicle. You're basically treating it the exact same way. And getting vehicles to slow down in places like this is a challenge. You can do different things with bikers to do that, and I think there is some kind of ambiance with the existing condition down there that you'd hate to mess up too much by it.
Get some variety to the trail.
Oh, that is such a nice little spot down there. It's just beautiful to walk through there. It's very, very soothing. You're right on the lake. That boardwalk has a great ambiance. I mean, if it was, I could see where there's a little enhancement to that, where it could be fixed a little bit, because it's a little bit rough in spots. But, man.
So there is no other really nice access anywhere anywhere this side of Gooseberry all the way
I don't know.
where
Not
you
like
can
this.
actually get down by the water, and there's very little traffic.
If you could do anything on that boardwalk, would be to have a place where you could park your bike and a bench, so that the people could go down right there on that rock beach and enjoy it. And it's just this gorgeous beach. And staying on the town park road, then you got the Tofte Park, and we still have to talk about, people love that park. To come out that, all you have to do is hang out there on a sunny day and watch what's going on, and people love that park to death almost.
Well, most of the comments have been about the south side of the road. Is there any, and sort of from here, we need to kind of, to the degree we can, sort of focus some effort, or is there a general consensus that the south side of the road is the best option from a community standpoint, or is there any other?
But the south side, there's only one crossing now.
There's one crossing up.
The other one, there's multiple crossings?
There's multiple options, but there would only be one crossing.
Crossing, no matter
No, the problem with the north side too, and excuse me, John, I didn't mean to cut you off. Going through the Holiday Station and the American and that, those are busy, busy driveways, and to be tooling along on your bike and actually enjoying yourself. it's really like being in the city, and you're not going to be relaxed. You're going to be on your brakes. You're going to be stopping and watching and looking, and would not be enjoyable. Whereas once you get onto that lower road, all of a sudden, it's just a different experience.
If we were voting, I'd vote for the south side.
I'm with Jim.
I do think trying to control that water with these underground culverts, having seen how that water can come down that creek sometimes.
Yeah.
It's washed out, many in culverts.
Almost washed out Highway 61 twice.
Yeah, so that would be a tough thing.
Building a big.
Yeah, so you're either there in an easement condition,
Yeah.
And building, and I granted, Joe Sanders has done some work there, but to take that beautiful path and put it right through the salvage yard, what a travesty. Sorry. It just is not, that
It'll
is
be gone
not
in 30
an
years.
enhanced experience.
And I just want to double check, is there anybody that feels the north side holds the merit of the south side?
I personally think it should go down the north side. And if people want to come down this way, that's good. But is it cost prohibitive? I mean, it's like being a freeway. The dumbest thing they ever do goes running right through the middle of Duluth. What the hell, they wiped out Duluth completely when they ran it downtown. And in most cities, you find a way into the town. And this bike too, if the people want to come down this way, I would think that would be nice for them. But if they want to stay, if they were true hard-nosed bikers, the upper side of the road would be best for them. But like I say, I've seen them running a railroad tracks in Florida at 50 miles an hour on their damn bikes. When they pile up, they do a beautiful job. But that's the logical way is down the park road. It is. Because it just the cost of the other side is out of it.
Well, from here, I'm going to have some further discussions with Mark and some DNR staff, and then we need to get the MnDOT perspective into this as well. So those are the last kind of stakeholder pieces to help shape the full picture of this. I think we've had some great comments. I've got some other things to look at as well. So we can jump forward from here and keep looking. I thought the comments about the other options on the east side of the bay and getting to that old road grade right behind the Coho might have some validity. But it's a great discussion for Dennis. He has a walkway there already. The biggest problem with having anything on the south side of the road in here is getting up that driveway. I mean, those grades are pretty far beyond any real bike trail slopes. It's a pretty extreme slope down to get down to these points, and how you get people to slow down on their bikes before you get to that boardwalk. If that boardwalk stays in place, is a problem. So. But keeping everybody low as they move along has some potential. Yep.
Are you looking for comments on which path to take around the post office?
Yeah, if there are any comments, let me get there.
Because I think you skipped by that. You were trying to
Yep.
do something. I'd like to see what people think about either taking the road around or going through the backyards of the phone building and the post office there.
Splits here.
Is the post office on federally owned land or is it leased?
Lease. It's a lease. Somebody in Chicago or Indianapolis owns it.
When you go around it, you're going right by the building, the maintenance buildings of Bluefin. And you have semis and you have work staff having their lunch. It's a very busy part going around that way.
Too.
Right. But if you go to the left, you'd avoid all that.
You're not showing that that piece there.
Right there.
Yeah, right there, yeah.
Versus this one.
Yeah.
Well, if you could get the easements, it would certainly be more desirable.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because there's always traffic in there, right there.
And lots of it.
Yeah.
Who owns the other property?
John Tofte owns that chunk that you're,
Yeah, I don't think it goes on to that, though. That, where the post office says belongs to a private person that lives in, what did you say?
I live in Chicago, he was telling me Indianapolis or
Yeah,
Chicago.
and then it's leased to the U.S. Postal Service and, Quest. or-
Who owns this parcel? That
Well, that's the phone company.
It's the phone.
Century Cal,
the beginning of that will be in John Tofte's.
Well, can you pull it down?
Yep. We're just past the,
No, you're out of
It wouldn't go into
and this is, and I don't know if that's feasible or not, but I figured it wasn't.
Can anybody
Good idea.
tell me the status of the Tofte property? It's for sale.
It's reverted back to John Tofte.
It's still for sale.
I mean, is construction continuing, or is it just on hiatus?
No, it's completely
It's done.
stopped.
Okay.
For how many years?
It'll send you money.
new roofs, so.
Hasn't been any action since I moved up here,
No.
How long ago was that?
2003.
So all that, not that I say it went onto the property, but all that wood inside the building and stuff has been there, sitting there for that
Right.
long?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, well, the foreclosure just happened, was last winter.
Last
She-
year.
She rented 10 mini storage units to pull all the stuff out of there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we should segue into the other part of the project, but we certainly have plenty of things to work on, and there'll be ongoing discussions that are going to help shape up bring clarity to how it relates to the MnDOT right away, and make sure that things are working from that standpoint, and also vet out feasibility and trail constructability. So for the next time, it's difficult for me to see, just to kind of frame, I think, where we're going to end up, but it's difficult for me to see, and sort of has been since the beginning, that we're going to arrive in this process at the route. I think with where budgets are, potential for other money to come into the project, the community is going to be best served by kind of narrowing down the options. But having, continuing the dialogue so that you are fully informed when the picture becomes full. The other issue is that we don't have the opportunity here to, basically do pre-engineering on a trail. So there's going to be some fuzzy area with what's really going to happen and what's going to, are you going to need to put in storm sewer? And there's storm sewer issues with this route too, So there's things that we'll have to make some assumptions on. The picture, I think, will become clear through the process. I think we've already heard a lot about narrowing the options. Ideally, in my mind, when we started this, I thought if we could get to 2 options in Tofte, we're doing great. We've got a pretty good setting to move forward. But that's kind of my take on it. I think people will continue to look for funding in different places to make sure it gets built. But I just thought I'd throw that out there. I've certainly got some marching orders to move forward, so if there's any other comments on the trail, we can take them. Otherwise, we'll jump into the Tofte Park piece and get to that.
Thank you.
Okay, it's getting to 8 o'clock already, so I'll kind of put on this piece.
Talk to Park. All
right, so part of what the images here, it shows just to show part of our process and what we look at when we come into a place. We started the discussion last time to get people's opinion about what's important to the community, understand the culture and what people would like to see in the park. Looking at history and how this place came to be, the sort of important things of life here, is also part of the process. We've looked at some historical aerial photos last time, and I did some more digging and research on, and really just trying to find the imagery and things that can inform design as you move forward, and what kind of structure do you build if you're going to build a structure. And there's ideas about enclosing the structure in the last meeting, which I think are fantastic, but it is a change and it wants to fit. So some of these are a little fuzzy, but these are some of the things that we dug up at the old dock in America. All of these are Tofte photographs, people that lived and work here, and it starts to give you yes, so it's a kind of an education process for me, and this is another shot here too from Tofte. All of these ones are. And just building some understanding. This is a rendering someone had put together at some point, but it's a great way to sort of envision what a place was. And all these places you visit have always changed over time, and just kind of understand that change when you're thinking about future change is always a good thing to consider, what a place really is. And you all know this area very well, but just a couple images to put in our mind of some of the beauty of the park, the public space, and some of the amenities that have been built over time are fantastic. But the accessibility to that lake shore, the open green space right on the lake, on the dock, obviously, the shoreline and the character of the geology and the interaction of water. Start to provide sort of the foundation of where you can build. Some other things that we looked at, and I'll bounce back to a couple of these, but you start to look at the scale and the types of buildings that might be interesting fits. This was actually a finished structure which has this kind of interesting pass-through component to it. This is sort of a modern adaptation of that. It's very quaint and in some ways very simple, but elegant, and it has strong features. And certainly with the fireplace and things. But you can see how these places, how people sort of rethought some of these traditional forms. This is an adaptation of a Norwegian fish house. This is in Norway, actually, and it became a real interesting thing to study on the water, and how somebody has basically recreated a boathouse for use as their cabin. A real interesting perspective on the materials, the design elements. There's some very subtle things that are going on with how these things get articulated, and just some of the ornamentation. This deck is really, it's basically a solid timber deck. There's some real interesting things that go on, a different perspective and how it relates to the water. So these are just snapshots of some of the things that we looked at when we were digging through. There's a couple other images that I've got here that just made me think. This is the traditional. Again, it gets back to the Tofte twin boathouse, and all these things come from a sense of community, and this idea of kind of from this type of culture and tradition. There's sort of this concept of fitting architecture, or maybe appropriate architecture, and back to that kind of sense of community and sort of living at the water's edge. And I'll break here. I can get back to some of these in a minute. So those are some of the things that we looked at. These are the boards that were hung up over here, which is a summation of all those photos that we just looked at. But this is what we came up with, and this is a pass at the site plan for the shelter. And so the first thing is looking at the parking lot and doing some reconfiguration with it. It's very inefficient right now. It has a narrow pull-in and then 3 spots here that you can park in, and the turning movements kind of eliminate all of the use of that widened pavement. And so by simply re-articulating this, we can get a full drive-in, park, and back out. And we've got 6 stalls here. One of those would be ADA stalls. And you'd have the loading zone here as well. So it's a reconfiguration of that. The loss there is the fences. Those fences are tied up on that parking lot, so those would have to be removed. And then we're showing just, from thinking about the lake view and the perspective from the water of the park, and then doing like a little bit of screening kind of in this open space, and just defining the parking edge, creating some buffer was the idea with the plantings. From there, and I'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see better. From there, the existing trail runs in this direction. A proposed trail would break off. This is all fully ADA accessible, and then meet the site for the proposed shelter. The proposed shelter roof line is this dashed line that runs all the way around the shelter area. The idea of a deck or some usable space around the shelter was brought up in the last meeting as well. This actually proposes concrete paving, and the idea would be that the concrete paving would be met and framed with some low 18-inch seat walls. And so you could articulate the bottom. The walls essentially run off into the green paved space. Another thing that we identified was a 20 by 40 footprint. What types of uses happen here and what may be possible. We talked about a number of different things. And that's essentially the size of a rented tent. So you've got that block of space that's flat and usable here at the front. So what this does is it brings a ADA accessible facility closer to the parking, increases the parking, and let me get back to the site plan here. Sorry about that. It gives you more space, usable space around the shelter, so it really becomes flexible for a variety of different uses. The one thing that we showed proposed moving was the playground, and so that shifted out of that space and was slid down. So I think the playground is in a relocated location. This hatched area right here is the existing shelter, just for some perspective as to where we are. It's pretty easy to see where we're siting the shelter. If you come out here, there's kind of 2 little coves. The grading here the slope comes out to a point, and it's deeper here, and then it's deeper into that second one. And there's also this large existing spruce. So if you're kind of wondering where this sits, it's that second spruce that it's just past, and that's where the shelter is. The idea with siting the shelter is to actually cut it into the hillside and nestle it back into grade. So this is actually a wall, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a second when we look at the shelter. The other thing to mention here was the connection back to the trail at this location. So you've got this kind of movement that could happen, which would be a nice way to kind of get around it. I do think you need to make some connections back and forth. So that essentially describes how that whole piece would be set and nestled. And I'll bounce back and forth just a little bit between the 2 schemes, but this is what we came up with, and I think this view here is the one to start with. I showed you the idea of the pass-through. The concept for the shelter looks at establishing an outdoor open-air component to the shelter, as well as an enclosed component to the shelter. That trail walks up and approaches right on this axis, so that ADA accessibility comes through here, and so you're accessing over the pavement around the building and right through it. This is a board and batten proposal, and essentially this is battens that basically just screen off kind of the backside. What happens when you cut in the wall then is you end up with a flanking wall to either side, and that wall cuts back into the hillside for retainage. And so you've kind of nestled this little cove on the backside of the building. The fireplace sits directly in the middle of the building and would function from both directions so that you could have a fire and a gathering outside, or you could do it from inside as well if both happen at the same time. One of the things we've seen with some of the successful park shelters is that they're sort of breaking down the space of the shelter. Shelters that have capacity for people often get kind of taken by one smaller group. It doesn't, if there's 8 people in a shelter and it really could handle 30 or 40, it's weird to walk into someone else's party. So this idea of kind of splitting the space makes it a lot more flexible. The rest of the design elements really look at sort of being able to combine those spaces as well. So you have options for kind of multiple groups using the space as well as both. These are garage doors, steel doors with glass. And so these are overhead doors. The proposed structure is a scissors truss, so that allows you to actually open both of these doors, which are on both sides of the building, so 4 doors, to turn this into a fully open air facility so that we're creating big openings on both sides. And those doors would essentially open up like this and then be up at the scissor truss height. So you don't have the height of the garage doors hanging over your heads when you open them up into the inside of the building. We're doing this on another project right now. It's a residential project, and that's how their garage is more of a workshop than anything else. And we went with a scissors truss, and it's a really nice way to kind of keep that space open and feeling lofty inside the structure. The proposal for the base and as well as the fireplace and these walls is a board form concrete. There's been kind of a resurgence of the use of board form. It's a traditional way of framing or forming concrete when plywood wasn't available. So it has kind of a timed look to it. The texture creates some level of interest. I've got some more photos that I'll go back to and show you some examples of what that looks like. But it's a good aesthetic, and it looks good as straight gray concrete as well. So it's an interesting way to do the finish on the building. The front of the building then essentially has a large glass front. Those doors being so close to that front wall, your procession from the sides and right around the front's really easy. There's also shutter doors on both sides. This is an idea that could be incorporated at all the sides if wanted. It's protection from the elements really, but there's also a safety protection for vandalism that you get out of having doors that you can shut over the glazing. And so you could look at protecting garage doors in the same way on either side of the building. This is the full view of it. As you look back then, those flanking board formed concrete walls run off to either side, and that's holding back the grade, so that grade is sort of nestled back. One thing that I did want to show on the site plan, just jumping back to that quick, this line right here, this heavy dashed line, is a 75-foot setback from Lake Superior. The setbacks, and we'd have to look at it a little bit closer, the 75-foot setback from ordinary high water gets you the setback for a building structure. Technically, you can build within setbacks if you're under 400 square feet and they permit it. So there may be some flexibility there, but we feel pretty confident being outside of it that we're not going to have any real issues with having any close
40
structure.
feet.
That's from the vegetation line.
Correct.
So and we meet all of the setbacks from the ordinary high water veg. The other one's bluff line, which we don't have to worry about here. So the footprint, to give you a better understanding of what this looks like, is again the trail running up. There's the higher wall and then the lower seat walls. This would all be that board form style. You're on the terrace then, the pass through, dog trot, and then the terrace on the other side. This would be sort of a boulder wall to just take care of a little bit of the grade that's needed on this side. These are outdoor tables, sort of 4 tables set there. There's 4 tables shown in the indoor space as well. You could fit more tables in the space if you'd like to. There's a door here, this is the fireplace, and there's a serving counter that's located right on this side of the fireplace. The other thing we looked at then was the glass doors, and so this is kind of the full pass-through if it were to be open, and then the lake window with the shutter doors that are on it that you can open up and close. The overall structure from front to back is 48 feet, and the width is 24 feet. So I believe we're the same width, and it was either 8 or 10 feet longer than the existing shelter that's there. I can't remember right offhand. But we're not, we're sort of within the scale of what you had before. In a very different structure when it becomes enclosed. There were some comments last time about whether or not the fireplace was a good idea. It's hard to think of the enclosed structure and then needing to heat it with electric somehow, and it seems like if the need to enclose the structure has to do with prolonged usability, that having the fire capacity is a good thing. It's something that needs to get managed, but we thought it was worth keeping on the table for now and continue the discussion. In the end, what you end up with, the flooring inside of the space could be concrete. You could polish concrete. You could keep it very utilitarian. If doors were left open, they can be locked up. So it could be left as kind of a open space for periods of time if that's something that's wanted. It could be a lockdown facility as well. And thinking about the management of the facility and how it gets used or rented or reserved are all things that I think need to be thought through and considered. Based on what we heard last time, this was kind of the summation that we came up with. The overall style, very much is derived from this kind of boathouse architecture that falls in kind of this more contemporary, sort of slightly more refined or defined edges, but relatively simple structure. We were talking about whether or not it should be colored or not. You could leave this as weathered wood. You could treat it and stain it and let it weather, which is another option. Part of this is, and a lot of the architecture in town has been driven by the twin boathouse, that you see in this repeated form. And so trying to find something that's new and interesting and sort of a little different take, but sticking to some of this kind of architectural appropriateness is where we thought was a good place to go. So anyhow, we went with red because it's kind of a nod back to this boathouse idea without trying to replicate something exactly like it. Any questions on
what kind of a roof is that material?
Yeah, we have it as a metal roof, and it could be shingled. I think it's sort of wide open. Just from a maintenance and longevity standpoint, I think there's some value in thinking about a metal roof. They're expensive, but it's a good thing to consider. And I think sort of the continued use of them has gotten the metal roofs more into people's vocabulary. The aesthetic is, I think at first people are really, years ago when the people really started using them. There's different finishes as well, I think, that are, some of the colorings can get pretty obnoxious. Even some of the green ones just don't work well at all. So there's different ways of doing it, keeping it kind of muted and a little more subtle. It might be a good way to think about a metal roof. But I don't think it's something that you have to get married. We get married to as part of the architecture of the building. It's something that's pretty flexible in my mind. But just from an ownership and with what we've talked about in funding something like this and getting it, bringing in funding to pay for it, the metal roof makes sense to me because that upfront investment gives you those extra years of service. So I can feel free to ask any questions. One of the things I was going to show you was some of the other imagery that we had. This is a project that we worked on in Marine on St. Croix, the St. Croix River, and this is a traditional board form. This is a historic farmstead, and we restored all of the farmhouses that were built on stacked rock, poured walls, where they kind of have the rock coming through randomly, the old concrete pours. And then we did a board form. Just wanted to show you kind of a mix of wood, that board form concrete. This is all bluestone, so just some of that look. This is another image of timber. This is T111 paneling on the roof and heavy timbers, but again, just kind of that board form. This board form actually had a maintained a minimum 1/4 inch gap. So it's a pretty heavy board form, where the others were stacked. This had a rough cut lumber on it. That other one actually used milled lumber, and so it's a much finer texture. But it gives you a sense of how steel and these components can actually sort of work together. Here's a timber bench that we had that sits on a concrete pad. So again, it's just kind of the use of materials in simple, relatively cost-effective ways, and using some accents that bring you back to some of the materials that are fitting for the setting. So here's that back to this image here. Any questions?
That's quite unique. The other existing buildings that are there have horizontal siding.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think it should tie in with those?
It's certainly something we could look at. I don't. We went with the board and batten, but the aesthetic isn't changed that greatly by going to horizontal siding. So I wouldn't have a major issue with it. Part of the thought was that there's just some offset with the board forming, the lines of the two, to get some mix, so it's not just kind of corduroyed up the building. But
when you show the graph from where you've tucked it in on the shoreline and all, where is the old existing?
Well, I can show you. The existing shelter's right here.
Right over there?
Yep, that dash line is the existing shelter.
Okay.
And the existing parking terminates about right here.
Okay.
So we're over half the way back. Yeah.
There is that little cove. That's a neat spot where you got that tucked in there.
Yep. We are right on, I went down there today to take a look at it. We're right on the kind of extents of those tree roots. Yeah.
Are we going to be utilizing our existing bathrooms or expanding them, or, I'm not sure if it's quite ADA compliant right now. It's probably close, but.
Yeah, I know the approach is not. There's enough jump there to get in.
I think the inside is, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that was the idea.
You keep using that facility.
Yep. Yeah, the thought was there wasn't any plumbing that would go into the new shelter. It was electric.
Okay, so if we're putting electric in there and you're thinking of a nighttime use, we probably should think about putting a light in there.
Yep.
It's awful dark at night in that little room. At least that's what my wife tells me when we go fishing. It's dark in here.
Well, and if it's to be used throughout the year, it gets darker a lot later when it gets cold. So
now that building will be insulated, so if you actually go into the enclosed room and build a fire, you actually have a chance of that room being usable at late in the fall, early in the spring.
That was the thought. Yep.
What is the specifications on that chimney? I have this problem with concrete, anything that that water gets in and starts spalling and then popping in and out, there's no chance for that on the chimney above the roof? And the liner, what's the liner? I mean, is it like a stainless liner or?
Inside of the
Yeah,
chimney.
yeah, how are they?
Yeah, I could show you some examples at the next meeting of an outdoor board form chimney that we did. It wasn't connected to a house. It was built up on the inside with fire brick and masonry, and then board formed on the outside of it. I would have to go back and look at what we specified for the concrete and what PSI it was, and the mixture of the concrete. That building has been up for I don't know. It's got to be 7 years, and it hasn't had any issues with spalling or other degrading conditions.
I think that two-sided fireplace is a great idea. I
Yes.
think it's going to get a tremendous amount of use.
Yeah, I like the open.
And overuse, so it's probably it needs to be built really well.
No, and you're correct in that.
Yeah.
You know.
And it'll have to be inspected regularly and things like that.
We're going to have whoever can get the closest wood vendor to that place will probably sell lots of wood.
Yeah. It's neat.
What's, you've got an approximate cost?
Yeah,
Don't say anything. Think about it, get used to it.
it's not cheap.
How much is Tofte?
Not anything.
This is and I'll kind of give you a quick backstory and then.
We've already had a couple big shocks this week, so
Yeah.
we're used to it. We're used to it.
Yeah, but this isn't Tofte funding though.
Yeah.
Money's money.
Well, it is.
Still somebody's got to make.
Well, yes, but I mean, it isn't quite so painful when it's not just us sharing the burden.
Yep. And the maintenance is a significant one, and the uses that happen here is a significant maintenance issue as well. With this space and the terrace around it, you know, I mean, we looked at the tent as well. I mean, you're inviting a lot of people to have a party down at the Tofte shelter. So, you know, there are some things that go along with it. From what I've seen of the Tofte Park, it's evident that the town does a good job of maintaining what you have. It's kept, you know, and the what's there and the amenities that have been built have been sustained and maintained. I don't know exactly how it all works, but I've seen a lot of places that are in much worse condition. But thinking about how it works and gets maintained with these types of projects, you know, they're strictly looked at as how do they generate revenue, you know, and that's weddings is always the big one in park facilities, especially when you enclose them. But other gatherings, workshops, education, all different kinds of things can happen in these facilities, especially if you have the ability to enclose them. So, you know, many different things could happen there, but sort of thinking about what you actually want to have down there is something you should really consider. But for a lot of park departments, it is a significant revenue generating piece of their system. So
With that knowledge, you know, if it does become something for bigger things, we should design into it like a pad where the porta-johns could go, because I think for some of these bigger, if there is a bigger wedding or whatever, they're going to want more than just the one restroom. And having a space where the porta-johns could get dropped off, at the cost of the renter, I guess, whatever you want to say, would be, I think, a good thing.
yeah, what is the availability of potable water at this site?
Right now, bad, maybe not too far in the future, 3 season. I mean, right now, this very second, this building has no water. We are out. We have negotiated with Dennis Risdall to tie into his water system, so we're soon going to have potable water here in the building, and wouldn't be much to run a shallow black water extension down to their 3 season and drain it. As long as you could disconnected this end and put some air to it, and if it's on a grade, you just open the other end and let it drain. I think 3 season isn't too bad. 4 season is probably out of the question.
And I think it does impact the availability of water. If people are going to have events there, I mean, everything can be brought into a space, but water is often kind of the one that gets considered. There's electric down on the site as well. Do we know what is available?
20 amps.
20
is
amps.
what Dave Rudels tell you.
Is there capacity for any more?
No.
Okay.
Well, he could change
We should keep it simple.
Yeah, no, he had run the wire out of the pump house at the fire department, and when he designed it, he only designed it for a 20 amp, and to draw more out of there would possibly infringe on the fire department's immediate use of the lake pump.
Okay.
So it would either have to come from the overhead here, which might be easiest to bring an overhead line down to it or bury it underground. We had originally run it from the transformer on the west side of the far parking lot by Bob Boomgardner, and there's an underground line running to the fire department pump house. But to get that all the way over to the proposed building there, it would probably be a lot cheaper to bring a new line down.
Okay. That's another consideration if there's an event, that usually you're wanting to have a 50 amp service.
Yeah, it's not there.
And it's just something to think about. If equipment's being brought in that needs to be run and heat food and deal with large groups of people and sound and whatever else people want to bring, these are all things to consider. But
I think the power line is fairly close, so I don't think it'd be a huge deal to get a 100 amp service down there, or 200 amp service. Probably don't need that.
Back to the cost question, we'll continue to refine it, and we'll take some different looks at this thing too before the next meeting, but kind of our WAG number on all of the site work is $150,000 for all of the walls, the excavation, and the parking areas. I think the building's going to push $300,000 all said and done, and we'll continue to revisit that number with this design. So I think the backstory on that is the Beaver Bay example. That project brought in $400,000 of federal money and required a local match. I can't remember what the percentage was. Once that money was put in place, some legacy money was found, and a variety of other smaller funding sources came together. So it really becomes about wanting to get the community kind of mobilized and supporting an idea, and having a design that fits well so that we can garner that support, and then making the argument that the location and the usability and the public benefit from it is worth the while, and to have a successful funding ask. So it kind of cobbles together, but there's pools of money out there that add up pretty fast. The other thing is at this point where we're going to end is a concept, and it's kind of the time to think big. And the other thing is that the money you ask for isn't, you might be granted money, isn't always the money you get as well. So there is some value, I think, in setting the sights a little high. But it's a place to start, and in the case where you get money, you look at what you have, and you have a place where you found something that worked. Now we can look at value engineering that and move back to a spot.
Okay, so who's going to drive this? Is this something you're going to drive, Justin? I mean, are you taking this project and moving it? Who moves it ahead from here?
We can certainly provide assistance in finding these pots of money and everything like that. I mean, like CJ was saying, getting a local community buy-in and looking to, go forward with that. So there is some, interaction, but when it comes to, finding those pots of money or, helping out and putting together grant applications, that's certainly something we can do.
But who does the project? I mean, there's gotta be someone that's, we have this money, but who is out there, making sure that the permits are issued and that, the stakes have been put out and the setbacks are right, and, who lets the bids, who sets the bids, who does the engineering, who hires the engineer, who vets the engineer, all of these things, who does that?
So in a case like this, say you go after some funding and it requires some match. If that's the town or the county, would probably be the first two places that you'd have to look. Some granting applications, a town, from what I know, and I'm not the funding person, but stop me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if the town would qualify for all of them, so the county would be required as a partner, and the match funding would have to be agreed to levy the actual grant request. In a case like that, if it were the town or the county, you would essentially, either of those entities would administer the project. So they would be run through you or the county. There would be, typically in a situation like that, an RFP. People would respond to do the job. And in a case like this, you'd have a place where you would start, but you would essentially replicate this meeting, or maybe our next meeting, where you'd come back and say, well, now we got a budget, here's the refined concept. And that's the first step in the construction document process. You run all the way through your construction document and your bid document. Depending how you want to do it, some counties want to administer their own bids. Sometimes they want the contractors or the consultant to do it. So you do it both ways, and you can bid the project out. You get the contractors to bid in, review bids with the county or the township, and pick a bidder and pick a contractor. From there,
I believe me. The township understands everything that you're talking about. What I wanted to know is, all this stuff is being talked about, and I need to know at what point the township needs to now drive this project.
Well,
we need to have
there's assistance from the North Shore Scenic Drive Council, there's assistance from ARDC, potential assistance from the county engineer.
Assistance is not not a lead person, though. There would need to be somebody that's making sure that all these permits are getting pulled and everything is being done. Believe me, we've been doing this for a couple of years with our senior housing project. It's one thing to talk about money and assistance. It's something else to drive a project of this size and make it happen.
I understand. Who administers the project on
a daily basis?
Yeah, on the municipality or the townships.
So we would have to have a construction manager and right on down the line. So it's a lead person that's following up all the little details.
Yeah,
and there's a million of them.
And I think what happens with a lot of these is what I've seen is that counties end up taking on responsibility for some of this project because their capacity to manage the project is greater. There are many projects that I've worked on, and everyone's different, where your level of involvement is everything versus nothing.
Right.
So it is a question that can be put to the consultant as well. I've never known of a scenario where the municipality, county, or town, or wherever you're working has no involvement.
Well, of course not.
There's always going to be needing to do some meetings, vetting out issues with permitting, and there's a lot that goes into it. So there is a certain level of investment, but it changes quite a bit between who you're working with, what I do, once the construction document's put together and you start going through that process. So.
All right, let's just, for comparison purposes, you see now, the Beaver Bay project was 400,000, you said?
The total budget on the trailhead was over 700,000.
Over 700, all right. And how much of it, was 50% of that federal money? 60% or 30% roughly?
60 to 70%, 60% roughly.
60%. What was Beaver Bay's percentage? I mean, or was it, because I'm understanding there, or was this grants from a lot of different sources? You know, you got IPPR, you got the coastal programs, or all of these different things. Was it completely funded through grants?
The city of Beaver Bay's percentage was 0.
Percentage was 0.
Yes.
That's the answer I was looking for. Okay.
However, Lake County did have a participation in that through their state aid account.
Okay.
So kind of the backstory on that was the Lake County had a number of projects for improvements that they were considering, and just geographically, the county's kind of managing where they're doing projects, so they had to think about the whole geographic area.
Mm-hmm.
And that area had not been, there's pressure, I guess,
They've
politically.
been underserved. There.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the county basically stepped forward for the match.
Okay.
When that money came in, the county started looking for other means of assistance, and some of your folks and other people helped on finding other pots of money.
Yeah, there was Minnesota State historical money in that project too.
Okay.
So when you look at things like this, the scenic drive and the Gitchi-Gami trail, and does it have a trailhead function? Does it have interpretation and money tied to history and other agencies that are interested in funding things like that? There's funding that came in to the Beaver Bay Trail that paid for the interpretive panels. There was money that paid for kiosks. There's a lot of smaller pieces that came in, but they had it started with the county and the relationship there. So that's one example of how.
Yes, that answers my question.
Yeah.
How much is it for the relocation of this particular pavilion? Is that a big amount of it? Or is the building itself the big amount?
The building itself, these are good guesstimates at this point, but the site work and the paving and the walls and the excavation work is about $150,000, and then the building would push upwards of $300,000 to do the building.
And as it is located now, it is an existing structure.
Yep.
Can we build a new building upon that existing structure without moving it?
It's possible.
Without going through a lot of hoops?
Yeah,
Isn't that a concrete crab?
you'd have to look at what you could do. Is it slab on grade?
It's a slab floor there, but it's
Oh,
cracked.
it's cracked.
It's cracked, yeah.
It would have to be taken out.
There's no rebar in it at all, so it's...
Yeah.
And it's-
So then it's a question of whether you want to foot it or not, and it's.
But are you running into permit problems?
No, the big permitting issue is with the setbacks, and we're out of the
That's what I mean.
setbacks. It's hard to say with knowing exactly. It looks like the existing structure is darn close to that setback as well, but it looks like it's out of it. This one is slightly larger than the other one. They're pretty close, but there's space there. There's not a lot of other spaces in the park where you could do a building. This is one of them. I think part of the comments we responded to was the distance from the parking to the shelter so far that from an accessibility standpoint, it's probably tougher for some people to use. And so bringing it closer, if it was possible, was one of the priorities. So that's why we
Again,
did it.
was this park given for the locals or for the foreigners?
Those darn Canadians, you mean?
No. I'm talking about an influx of tourists. The park was given for the local people. And that was the intention of the park. It's nice to have other people there, but do we want to invite?
I think
Commercial?
that would be a good way to put it. I think the big focus would still be local, but it would also serve other people.
But are we inviting?
I think if you want the funding, you're gonna have to do some inviting.
Right.
Yeah, we rent it now.
How many times was it rented out last year, Bart?
We have 3 on board this year, possibly a 4th at $250, the way it is.
4 of them
So far,
Three
this year.
paid, 3 paid, 4 is tentative,
for this year?
yeah.
Does that pay for John's mowing?
Pretty much.
The other thing in regards to setbacks too is impervious surface, because this is in the North Shore Management Zone. And because the site is so open, there's no question there either that this would fall under those requirements.
Well, this is also going to be for the bikers, right? Especially if you use the park road. The
Potentially, yes, it could be, just sheltered space. I think people will generally want to visit it and spend some time there.
Right when it's time to have lunch.
Yeah. On a day like today, you'd certainly find people sitting out there around on the outside of it. It'd be a good day to have the doors open. But it's a good question, especially when you think about what you want to happen down there. And it's, having a shelter, that's how you rent it, I think, is what type of events you would want there. And the question of inviting I think it's a serious one. And it's, these can take a lot of attention when you start bringing in big groups of people. So,
And we've talked about it that at the town board level, that we really do not want to have weddings there every weekend. That is not a desirable thing to do. We've allowed a few. We've had some bigger ones and discovered that it does not sit well with, people who want to go home to their kids, and all of a sudden there's a big wedding going on. It's like, well, no, this is our park. So I think that the town and its townspeople, we need to, it's open for people to come and use, guests that are staying at Bluefin or Surfside or, friends of the family, and, smaller events on a limited basis. As far as the town, I think wanting to have big groups there on a regular basis, I would say that the town isn't interested in that, at least not from the people I've heard from.
And I think that's completely up to the town.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we actually advertise in a way for people to use it through the museum by having their walks through there. But that's minimal, to say the least.
I think part of what Andy was saying about inviting people there, one of the strategies is that what happens here, and it may be, and part of what we'll kind of look at is there kiosks located at this place, and are there some bike racks, and does it become a Gitchi-Gami wayside, as a destination for bikers to come and stop. And doing this right here with parking would kind of get you there, and that's what starts to open different pots of money. So.
And, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say they're against that, bikers or people walking. Where I've heard comments are when there's a wedding for 300 people down there. And that's too much, in my opinion.
Loud music?
Loud music, no.
Yeah.
Well, we have an 11 o'clock close the park sign up there now. It's not. Well, it needs to be a peaceful, quiet place for people to go and contemplate and bring their kids and feel safe. Not a big party place.
Mm-hmm. I think that big group stuff can be totally regulated by the township.
Yeah.
We can still call it, in order to open up pots of money for funding, we can call it a Gitchi-Gami trailhead.
Well,
but that's not big group.
That's for someone riding
Right.
by on their bike.
That's not big group.
300 people. That's 2 or 3 people stopping on their bikes and getting off and enjoying the lake. I think that's appropriate use. There is a difference in use.
I think that'll be, as long as you're not barring that type of use, the funding sources will be fine with that.
Right. Oh, I don't have a problem with that, as long as, we've got some park policies in place now. I would assume that they would remain there.
Yeah.
And we
It
set
wouldn't
park
change.
policy, and And he says sometimes in order to get where you want to go, sometimes you have to take a little different direction. You still end up in the same place.
Well, and as a local person, I have no desire to go have a dinner at that current pavilion. I just
Well, it's always cold and windy.
cold
and it's
and
dark.
horrible in there. Where this would really draw me in for my family. It'd be really fun.
There'll be a lot more family events, I think, because of the enclosure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Part of the enclosure, and it's something we should just touch on quick, is that the enclosed space is relatively small.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's 24 by 24. And you
Well,
could
you've got 4 tables, that's 24 people comfortably.
Yep. Yeah. So, and was part of the strategy. Is it was hard to imagine big groups here, but it's just something to think about as you move forward. Is what those numbers are, because that's kind of how one way you can set what happens there. Is what's the largest group?
I mean, what's the size of this room?
Bigger, yeah.
26 by a little over that. 26, near the size you started.
About the size of this room, isn't it?
Be a fabulous family reunion area.
A little bit smaller. It's about 26 by 30.
Yeah.
Huh?
Hermanson's would use every year.
So that kind of gives you an idea.
But that goes right to the solution to what you're talking about as a problem.
Mm-hmm.
You're not having a wedding for 300 people in that.
Yep.
Right.
This doesn't work. You know, bring 50
Well,
people.
they bring big tents and put it up in the parking lot.
You have to decide if you want to let them do that.
Yeah. Well, that's where a lot of this, we had one and it was not a good thing, and we quickly made policy to stop that from happening again.
Where do you
Not
put
naming any
circus?
names.
Yeah, we're not going to do
Circus.
It was the elephants that did it. Yeah.
Put the whole tent where the parking cars were supposed to be on the
I
blacktop.
heard it was a hell of a party.
We don't do that no more.
I really like the design, CJ.
Yeah.
Oh, I think
Just
it's
the way it
great.
is, just beautiful the way it
It
is.
is so useful.
I like the red when you put the red, but I like the idea of the stain. To do a good dark red stain and then let it weather a little bit, then it gets that look.
Like an old barn.
Very well done.
Any other comments? I think there's some things we'll still look at here with, this piece of it as well. Certainly a lot to do with the trail. So I think if there's not any other questions, we'll break and